Activities at the state capitol, where last night Governor Patton delivered his executive budget address. The Civic Center in downtown Frankfort is now the location for a detailed presentation of the plan. I'm Bill Goodman for KET. The governor will be joined on stage this day for the presentation by State Budget Director Jim Ramsey, Deputy Secretary of the Department of Transportation Kevin Flannery, for what we understand will be a detailed explanation of the plan which was presented to lawmakers last night. The governor has, he's on the stage and getting ready to go to the microphone. Governor Paul Patton.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming out this evening. I want to speak to you very briefly, and then Mr. Ramsey will talk about the general fund proposals that we have. Then I'll come back and talk to you a little bit about the debt financing, and then we'll have Mr. Flannery will talk to you about our road fund proposal, and then we'll take questions. Last night I talked to the General Assembly and the people of Kentucky about the hard decisions that we need to make to do what we as a people, expressing our priorities through our legislators, have said that we need to do. Now we're going to talk about those decisions in more detail. Over the years, we've adopted a system of revenue generation which we believed would be a fair proportion of our labors to devote to the common good through government. Over time, the changes in our society, particularly our economy, have reduced the proportion of our resources which are available to grow our society through government. Over the past 4 years, we've made many adjustments to our tax code to make it more fair. It's been a piecemeal approach. The time has come to take a comprehensive look at our entire tax structure. The budget I presented last night anticipates these changes, and taking into account these changes we've already made in our tax structure will constitute a comprehensive tax reform package that will be revenue neutral when considered over my 4 years as governor. In the context of the general fund, our proposal does not increase the tax burden that we've already agreed to pay. It will only generate the same amount of money we have already said we need to run state government. It will just do it in a different way. I'll talk about our plans for the road fund in a minute, because roads are important, but it's our general fund financing programs to build a better society through government which will determine our fate. It's the general fund which pays for education and crime prevention and social services and regulation of businesses and industry and programs to grow our economy. I must report to you that our general fund isn't generating the amount of money that the laws we've passed were designed to generate. These laws didn't take into account remote sales, sales over the internet or through catalogs. We're not collecting about $140 million a year in revenue, which our people have agreed to pay, and people have said we need, because we collect virtually none of the sales tax due on these remote sales. The companies don't have any presence in Kentucky. The federal government won't let us audit them or force them to collect the taxes like our retail merchants must do. It isn't fair, but there's nothing we can do about that in the short run. I'll be asking the General Assembly to adjust our revenue code to collect the amount of general fund revenue our people have already decided is necessary to build the kind of society we want. In the process, adding to the changes in our tax code which have already been made, we propose to revise our tax code in a comprehensive way which will make it more fair. Just last week, the headlines emphasized the wide gap between our lowest income citizens and the upper middle class. Let's at least not make our lowest income citizens pay for an unfair share of government. Jim Ramsey will go into more detail about who pays what later, but I do want to note that our proposal will eliminate income taxes for about 200,000 low-income taxpayers and reduce income taxes for another 950,000 taxpayers. The taxes of about 275,000 taxpayers will not be changed. 412,000 taxpayers will have a modest increase. For instance, my state income taxes will increase, for 99, would increase by $1,093. Keep in mind that 39.6% of that will be deducted from my federal income tax liability. for a net cost of $660. Now, I'm not saying that $660 isn't a lot of money, but when I admit that the elimination of the intangible tax saved me $5,000 last year, and the elimination of the inheritance tax will save my estate $500,000, I find it pretty hard to feel sorry for myself. The net total of increased revenue for the general fund will just about equal the revenue we expect to lose because of unpaid sales taxes on remote purchases, about $140 million. If we recommit ourselves to the same level of government service that we've already agreed to, if we sustain the same commitment to general government that we had before remote sales began to erode our sales tax base, if we have a tax system which will respond better to a growing economy, we can realize the dream of KERA. We can live up to our commitments to post-secondary education. We can continue to reduce crime, and we can do a better job of helping our fellow Kentuckians who are less fortunate than we. These actions will not solve all of our problems, but the lack of action will be an admission that we're not ready to move into the 21st century. I'd like Jim Ramsey to fill out the details. Jim?
Thank you, Governor Patton, and good afternoon. Our format this afternoon will be that I will first discuss the proposals pertaining to the general fund. Joining me in this presentation will be Deborah Gabbard of our staff. Upon completion of our presentation dealing with the general fund, we'll turn it back over to Governor Patton, and he and Kevin Flannery will make a presentation pertaining to the road fund. Because of the length of the material that we have to present to you and the complexity of the subject that we're dealing, we would ask that you would hold questions until the end of our presentations. We commit to you that our technical staff and our professional people will be here as long as you would like for us to answer questions, but we would like to first complete the presentation of both the general fund and the road fund before we take questions. Yesterday, the governor discussed an aggressive agenda for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, an agenda that sets the course for a new century. What are the critical needs that Governor Patton discussed yesterday in his budget address? He talked about education, and he talked about education, 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 education. He talked about our needs to provide for healthier Kentuckians. He talked about protecting our people, growing our economy, all while maintaining fiscal responsibility. But as we began to put together our budget, we had commitments that we had to fund. We had current services, or our continuation budget, that we had to fund before we could address new program initiatives that would move Kentucky forward. So yes, we're talking about recovering or increasing revenues to finance our agenda so that we can move forward in the future. But more importantly, we're talking about making our revenue system fair, equitable, and responsive to the new economy. Numerous groups have studied our tax system, and on the screen we list several of the study groups of the last several years. There's been a lot of debate, a lot of discussion, a lot of analysis pertaining to our tax system. We believe it's time to quit talking and take action to make our system fair, responsive, and responsive to the new economy. We're proposing a fiscally responsible program to fund our needs, and in this discussion, in this presentation, we will try to address three basic questions. Why are we recommending these changes? How are we achieving fairness and equity in the changes that we're proposing? And what are the impacts of the plans? Let's begin with question one. Why do we need to achieve fairness and equity? Our income tax currently places an unfair burden on many of our working poor. This is a conclusion of many analyses, many studies that have been done, and you see two quotes from recent studies. One, an annual report that was presented to the governor last Friday by the University of Kentucky Center for Business and Economic Research in their annual report. The second study, the Barrett's analysis on tax competitiveness in Kentucky. Second, we cannot, as the governor has indicated, efficiently collect taxes that are legally due to us now. These are the taxes that are due to us through the use tax and remote sales, catalog and internet sales. And as the governor has indicated, the Long-Term Policy Research Center has estimated that the impact of these sales and foregone income to the general fund will be about $140 million by the second year of the biennium. Thirdly, we all know that our economy is changing. We're moving to a knowledge-based economy. Our revenue system must be responsive in that new economy. You see here a quote from one of the fiscal experts at the National Conference of State Legislators, where it says, talk about irony, now that states are enjoying their strongest economies and physical conditions in nearly a decade, it turns out that technology growth and development have the potential to undermine state and local finances in the long haul. Fourth, well, first let me show a picture of the general fund and general fund growth over the last several years to illustrate this point. First, let's look at our growth in our individual income tax from the period 1980 through 1998 and actually 1999. You can see you can see that the individual income tax has shown nice, steady, progressive growth over this period of time. It's a tax that we would call an elastic tax. It grows with growth in our economy. With our sales tax, you can see that back in the early 1980s, we actually collected more revenue from our sales tax than we collected from our individual income tax. Due to tax policy changes and changes in the economy, that's no longer true today. In general, a sales tax will not be as elastic as an individual income tax for the simple reason that consumers do not, over the long haul, spend all of their income. They attempt to save part of their income, and so as a result, their spending will be less than the growth in personal income. In addition, our current tax system does not tax many of the goods, many of the services that we currently purchase. And as we move to more and more of a service economy, more and more of our purchases are of a service nature that are not subject to the sales tax. Next, let's look at our property tax. And we'll talk more about the property tax in just a few minutes. But because of self-imposed restrictions, the property tax by its very nature is not a tax that will grow with growth in the economy. We've also made policy changes to reduce the property tax in recent years, including reduction in the intangible tax. We look at our corporate income tax, we see that it also is not a growth tax. About 10 years ago or 12 years ago, legislators in the general fund talked about a 10% rule, that the corporate income tax should generate about 10% of the state's general fund. Today it generates approximately 5 or 6% of our revenue to the general fund. It's a very difficult tax to predict. It's a very volatile tax. But as you can see, the growth over the long haul in the corporate income tax is very flat. Our coal tax is flat, declining, continues. In fact, in the most recent revenue forecast, to actually show a decline from where it has been in recent years. Everything else we categorize in the other category. This would include things such as the lottery, and it would include investment income and all other revenue sources to the general fund. And you can see that there has been some very modest growth in the other category, but very modest in terms of keeping up with growth in our personal income and growth in our economy. The individual income tax accounts for approximately 40%, nearly 40% of our general fund. The sales tax accounts for approximately 30% of our general fund. So these categories, the other category, the property tax, the corporate income tax, the coal tax, account for about a third, 30% or so of our general fund, and it's that part of our general fund that is not growing with growth in our economy. Let's look at it still yet another way, and let's compare ourselves to some of our neighboring states for the most recent fiscal year. You can see the growth rates in general fund tax revenues in our contiguous states. Virginia, 10.6, Illinois, 8.2, Indiana, 6.3, Missouri, 5.8, West Virginia, 4.6, Tennessee, 3.8, and many of you are aware of some of the fiscal problems and issues that are facing Tennessee today. And its growth rate for the fiscal year 99 was 3.8%. Ours was 3.4%. This is growth in general fund tax revenues. Total general fund grew 3.1% in Kentucky during that period of time. In Ohio, the growth rate's 2.6, but that is a reflection of cuts in their taxes during that period of time. Next, the fourth reason why we need to recover revenues. We have reduced taxes in Kentucky by over $370 million. That's the estimate for the second year of the biennium of the impact of the tax cuts the governor mentioned, tax cuts that have been implemented over the last 4 years. This is revenue that is not available to meet our critical needs. And if you look at these cuts and the impact of these cuts, they disproportionately benefit many of our higher income, many of our wealthy citizens. Let's look at what those cuts have been, and this is a long list, and because of time we won't go through tax by tax, but these are the taxes that have been cut since 1995. And these are tax cuts that are important to our people. We're not criticizing those cuts. These were reflection of policy decisions, in some cases court decisions and so forth, but this is revenue that has been taken out of our base, and you can see it listed here by different types of tax cuts, with the total being estimated an annual impact of $370 million by the second year of the next biennium. Who has benefited most from these taxes? This bar graph, and I realize that the print at the bottom may be very small and very difficult for the audience to read, but the bar, as I'm facing the graph, the bar on the left-hand side is for individuals with incomes of less than $10,000. The impact of the tax cuts for that group is $68. The next bar is for those individuals with incomes ranging between $10,000 and $25,000, and the impact of these tax cuts, recurring impact of these tax cuts, is $306 on average. Our third bar, the middle bar, is incomes $25,000 to $49,999, and the impact of our tax cuts of the last 5 years on that group is $581 on average. The next bar is the income group, $50,000 to $99,990. The impact of the tax cuts on that group, $635. And then finally, for our folks with incomes greater than $100,000, the estimated impact, $850. The shading area, for those of you that cannot read it, are the impacts of the different components of the taxes that have been cut during that period of time. This does not include the impact of one other very important tax that we cut, the inheritance tax. This is a tax that's paid by the descendants of one, and we did not include these in this table, since in effect this is a tax that's paid by one's beneficiaries, and this is a one-time payment. All the other tax cuts we went through are recurring. Those are annual reductions to our folks. This we tried to categorize using the same different income classes, less than $10,000, based on data that we had from the Federal Reserve and the Revenue Cabinet. The estimated value of their estates, as you can see, would be $45,600, and the savings would be $2,258. And you can see how the importance or value of that tax cut grows with one's income and with the value of one's estate, reaching up to those with incomes of greater than $500,000, and with an estimated value of an estate of $6 million to an impact of $500,000. Now, the second question that we would like to discuss with you is, how do we achieve fairness? What is our proposal for putting fairness and responsiveness back into our system? First, let's talk about the individual income tax. Essentially, what we're doing is going back to the recommendation of the 1995 Commission on Tax Policy and using that recommendation as our starting point for our proposal. We would, number one, retain federal adjusted gross income as the starting point for the determination of one's tax liability in Kentucky. We would require federal filing status We would replace our current $20 personal exemption, personal credit with the federal exemption of $2,800 per person. We would allow the federal standard deductions or federal itemized deductions, less state income taxes. What this means for a married couple is a current standard deduction is $1,700. The federal standard deduction for that couple is $7,350. So you can see the magnitude or impact that that would have. We would next recommend repeal of the low-income credit and the problems that it produces. We currently have a low-income tax credit. It was implemented with the tax changes in 1990. It was intended to provide relief to low-income individuals, and it has worked reasonably well, but has problems because of the stair-step nature of the tax credit and the steep drop-offs from 100% to a 50% credit to 25% credit and so forth. So we would replace the current low-income tax credit. It is no longer needed. Individuals would continue to calculate their tax liability at a 6% rate. We are not proposing increase in the individual income tax rate. And we would also propose the calculation of a Kentucky alternative tax, KET. This would apply to individuals with higher incomes, and we estimate that about 2% of Kentuckians will pay this alternative tax. We will go into more detail with you on the calculation of the tax and discuss this more with you at the end of the presentation and answer any questions that you have on that. How do we achieve equity with our business taxes? We're offering 3 proposals. First, to level the playing field for in-state and out-of-state companies in the payment of the corporate license tax. There is now a differential in the calculation method for in-state companies and out-of-state corporations. We've been taken to court. This is the USX case. We're carrying a liability on our balance sheet now. We would propose the same treatment for in-state and out-of-state corporations, and that would be to treat out-of-state corporations the same as in-state corporations in the calculation of their corporate license tax liability. Second, we would propose leveling the playing field for all businesses regardless of organizational structure. We would require corporations, LLCs, limited liability corporations, and limited liability partnerships to all pay the corporate license tax. Right now, LLCs and LLPs are not required to do so. Deborah Gabbard and I just came from a meeting with the board of the Kentucky State Chamber, and one of the members, the board said, "Oh, this is the loophole that we offer to LLCs and LLPs. You're closing that loophole." Third, leveling the playing field for businesses doing business in Kentucky, or the concept of nexus and the requirement for paying corporate income and corporate license taxes in the state. We'd like to show you a map of the current standards that exist among the different states throughout the country. First, if we look throughout the country, we see that there are 3 states that do not have a corporate income tax. So this concept is not relevant. Second, we have 15 states that have a deriving income standard as the basis for determining nexus and state corporate income and corporate tax liability. Third, there are 10 states. Let's see, did I actually say that wrong? Pardon? Okay. We have 10 states that the standard would be deriving income only, if I'm reading the chart right, is the basis for the determination of payment of corporate income and corporate license tax. Then we have another 22 states that have a business, doing business only standard as for the basis of determining state corporate and state corporate income and corporate license tax liability. And then finally, there is one state, Kentucky, that requires physical presence as the basis for determination if a corporation has to pay corporate income tax and corporate license tax. We have the most restrictive nexus standard in the country. We propose to change that to a standard more like those of other states. How do we propose to achieve fairness with our property tax? First, with real property taxes, we propose adopting the local rate setting provisions for the determination and calculation of the state rate. As you realize now, there's a difference in the calculation method between the state and our local governments, and what we're proposing is that the calculation method for the state be the same as the local governments, and this would involve allowing us to include the value of new property in the setting of the state rate. This will not cap the state rate. The state rate will continue to fall over time. Second, we propose a phase-out over 3 years of the state property tax on vehicles and boats. We believe that this will bring us more in line with our neighboring states, and again, what we've tried to do is put together a map of our contiguous states so that you can see why we are out of line in the treatment of motor vehicles at this time. You can see the state of Missouri, they have a local property tax on automobiles only. Illinois, no property tax on motor vehicles. Indiana, no property tax on motor vehicles. Ohio, no property tax on motor vehicles. Local property tax only in West Virginia. Virginia, Tennessee, no property tax on motor vehicles. We're proposing the elimination of the state property tax on our automobiles and our vehicles. How do we propose achieving fairness? The sales tax. First, equal treatment of prescription drugs. Most of us believe that prescription drugs are exempt from the sales tax now, and they are if we go to the drugstore and buy those prescription drugs. But if we're receiving treatment in a doctor's office, the drugs that we receive from the doctor are subject to sales tax at this time. Drugs that are administered at a nursing home or even a for-profit hospital are subject to the tax. We believe that this is an unequal treatment, and we're proposing equal treatment of all prescription drugs regardless of where they're dispensed. Second, equal treatment for communication services. Again, this is an area that gets a little bit complicated in trying to explain, but our proposal will actually be to eliminate gross receipts tax collected at the local level, local franchise tax, the unit valuation determination of property tax, and replacing those taxes with a excise tax on the communications industry, telephone, cable, direct broadcast, etc. This will broaden our base. This will bring into our tax base interstate phone calls, which are not now taxed. There's a distinction between phone calls that you make now. If you make a call between Pikeville and Paducah, that's subject to sales tax. If you make a phone call out of state, that is not subject to sales tax. The direct broadcast satellite industry is a growing industry. It's an industry that's currently not subject to taxation. This is a growing industry. It's been estimated that the growth in this business, this area in this industry is about 9% a year. This is another case where we will be adding elasticity, we believe, and responsiveness of our tax system to growth in the economy. We've been working over the last several weeks with communications industry, telecommunications industry, with local governments, our school districts, the League of Cities, with KET, and we believe that we have a proposal here that can be supported by all of those different groups. Third, apply the sales tax to the total price of repairs to tangible property. Does not tax repairs of real property. When I go in now and have a repair done to tangible property, the part that is part of the repair job is taxed, but the labor is not. What we're proposing is to tax both the labor and the part. Some examples of what would be taxable under this proposal would be my home computer. If I take it in to have it repaired now, any parts that are part of the repair process are subject to the sales tax. The labor is not. We are proposing that the labor be subject to the sales tax, lawnmowers, automobiles and commercial vehicles, copiers and office machinery. We have a detailed list of the types of things that would be subjected to this tax under our proposal, and we'll have copies of that available for you at the conclusion of our remarks. We estimate that about 2/3 of this tax increase would fall on our households, our individuals. About 1/3 would fall on businesses. As was previously noted, we're not talking about taxing repairs, labor on repairs to real property. These examples of things that we would not be proposing to tax be landscaping, repairing a roof on one's home, repairing a furnace, labor on the repair of a furnace or air conditioner in one's home, and any other repairs and installation to real estate. We're talking about tangible property only. Finally, in terms of how do we propose to achieve fairness, with the parimutuel tax, we're proposing equal treatment of racetracks. We now have a system where, depending upon a racetrack's handle, racetracks pay a different parimutuel tax. We're proposing a tax credit to the larger tracks that have to pay this higher rate, this 3.5% rate, and to qualify for the tax credit, the tracks would have to reinvest on a dollar-for-dollar basis in capital investment and horseman incentives or purses. And if a track such as Churchill Downs or Keeneland, when they qualify, make those reinvestment in capital or reinvestment in purses, they would then qualify for a credit that would provide them with the reduced rate, like the other racetracks in the state receive. Now, what are the impacts of this plan? Let's talk about money. We're talking about, in the first year of the biennium, a plan that will generate, with our phase-in schedule and our schedule of effective implementation date, $143.2 million and $144.5 million in the second year of the biennium. Later, the Governor and Kevin Flannery will talk to you about the road fund. I've not mentioned the road fund. The proposals that they will talk to you about have a total estimated impact of $78.5 million in the first year of the biennium, $167.5 million in the second year of the biennium. The proposals that we were presenting will make our tax system more fair. It will make our tax system more progressive. Again, I realize that many of you have a difficulty in seeing the bar chart here, but the bar chart is a graphical presentation of our effective tax rates by income classes. So you can see the blue bar is our proposed rate, the yellow bars are the current effective tax rates, and along the horizontal axis are different income categories. So the first set of bars are for, again, the person 0 to 10,000, 10,000 to 20,000, and so forth. You can see at the lower income scale, the blue bars are lower than the yellow bars. So our proposal will lower effective tax rates for the people at the lowest income level. When we get over to the approximately $75,000 to $100,000 income category, you can see that the bars are about equal. Then the blue bars begin to exceed the yellow bars, indicating that we will be increasing the effective tax rate on people in these income categories. So we'll be making the Kentucky individual income tax system a more progressive income tax system. How will this make us compare with our competitor states? This map here shows Kentucky and our contiguous states. And the top number for Kentucky, the 1.1, is our effective individual tax rate for households with the lowest 20% of households with the lowest 20%, the 20% of households with the lowest income. So our effective tax rate on that group of people, that 20% of our taxpayers, currently is 1.1%. Compares with Missouri, 1.3%. Illinois 1.7, Indiana 2.7, and so forth. You can see that currently we're a little bit higher than West Virginia, and Tennessee does not have a broad-based income tax. Our proposal will lower Kentucky's rate to 0.9, actually making us lower than all the surrounding states with the exception of Tennessee. Okay? For our taxpayers with incomes in the middle 20%, or 20% of our households with incomes in the middle tax bracket, and I'm not explaining this very well, but if you line up all of our taxpayers and take those along a spectrum, those with incomes of the lowest 20% were the first picture. These would then be the people between 40 and 60% with incomes between the income range for the incomes between 40 and 60% of our taxpayers. Their effective tax rate now is 3.7%, higher than Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, West Virginia, and Virginia. Our proposal will lower their effective tax rate to 2.9%, lower than Missouri, lower than Indiana, again, lower than Ohio, equal to West Virginia, and lower than Virginia. This is a 22% reduction in the effective tax rate for that group of people. Finally, if we take the individuals with the highest, the 1% of our population with the highest incomes, the current effective tax rate is 5.3%, higher than all the states except Ohio. The implementation of this proposal would increase the effective tax rate for that group of taxpayers to 5.8%. That is an increase. That's a 9% increase. So you can see the increase for this group is much lower than the percentage decrease for our other groups. The implementation of this program will make our system more fair. We've shown that with the progressivity, with the comparisons to other states. The governor had previously mentioned that we will be eliminating income taxes for about 200,000 tax filers in Kentucky. We'll be reducing income taxes for another 950,000 tax filers in Kentucky. There will be no change in the tax liability for approximately 275,000 tax filers. And finally, we'll be increasing income taxes for approximately 412,000 filers. To show you what the impact of this will be on some of our families that live and work in Kentucky, I'm going to ask Deborah Gabbard to go through some taxpayer profiles with you and show you what the impact of the total package would be on our working families in Kentucky.
I'm sure everyone is curious how the overall tax proposal would affect Kentucky households. So we put together 11 profiles for typical families in Kentucky, with one exception, and I'll point that out when I get to it. This is a profile of a single parent, a single mother with two dependents. Her federal adjusted gross income is $13,000 or less than $7 an hour. And we have approximately 65,000 taxpayers in Kentucky that fall in this filing status and make under $13,000. Currently, under state income tax, she does get a low income credit of 25%, but she is still subject to $311 worth of income tax. Under this proposal, her income tax burden would go down to absolutely nothing. In fact, she could make up to, I believe it's $14,850 before she would actually owe any tax whatsoever. The state property tax on automobiles, which we're phasing out over 3 years, proposing to phase out, would take that down from $15 to $0. The sales tax on repair and installation labor, we're making the assumption that she spends about $100 per year on that, would raise her tax $6. The increase in the gasoline tax, which we haven't talked yet in detail, and it'll be discussed in a few minutes, that is going to happen, we're proposing over 2 years, and it would raise her tax $29. So overall, her burden would decrease by $291 per year, or 89%. Now, what we don't have on here is the communications excise tax, and it wasn't possible to really decide or to calculate how much the average family would save, because a lot depends on what local taxes you're subject to, what services you currently purchase, and how much interstate long distance you use. It is fair to say, though, that the average household will have little or no change, and some may actually see a decrease in their taxes. The next profile is a single parent with 2 dependents, federal adjusted gross income of $20,000, and we have approximately 35,000 Kentucky households that file this way and make between $16,000 and $26,000. The state income tax here would decrease from $520 to $119. Overall, the state tax savings are $383, or 71%. The next profile is 2 parents with 2 dependents, federal AGI of $13,000. This is a poverty level, less than the poverty level, 1 wage earner, and approximately 15,000 Kentucky taxpayers fit this profile. Currently, they pay $296 in state income tax. This proposal would take them down to 0, and they could actually make up to $18,500 before they would have to file a return. Overall, the state tax savings were over $200. Profile number 4, 2 parents with 2 dependents, federal AGI of $40,000. We have 31,000 households that fit this profile. And again, the savings are $217, or 16%. Profile number 5, 2 parents, 2 dependents, federal adjusted gross income of $60,000. We have 34,000 Kentucky taxpayers in this profile, and the savings are $250, or 11%. You will notice here we also have a motor vehicle usage tax credit, and this is another proposal that you'll hear about in just a few moments. We have assumed that this household will buy a new car every 5 years and will save motor vehicle usage tax. The next profile is 2 parents with 2 dependents. Their federal AGI is $100,000. 10,000 Kentucky taxpayers fit this profile, or approximately fit this profile. Still, there will be a decrease of almost $200 in state income tax. Overall, a state tax savings of $447 under this proposal. Profile number 7, federal adjusted gross income, $200,000. This was not a typical Kentucky household. We only had 2,000 filers that fall in this category or make $200,000 or greater. They will, I'm sorry, Janet, could you go back there? Backwards. One more. Thank you. This family will see an increase. Their state income tax will go up approximately $2,600. Overall, a state tax increase of about $2,300, or a 25% increase. Profile number 8, single person, no dependents, federal AGI of $17,000, and approximately 209, this is our biggest category, Kentucky taxpayers fall into this category, make under $17,000. Currently, the state income tax is $591 on this individual. It'll drop just slightly, but overall, they will have a state tax increase of $24 or 4%. Profile number 9, single person, no dependents, federal AGI of $25,000, a state tax savings of $174, and we've assumed that this individual could afford a new car and would save on the motor vehicle usage tax. Profile number 10 is a married couple with no children, federal adjusted gross income of $40,000 per year, and this would lead to a state tax savings of $28 or 2%. And the last profile is a married couple with no dependents with federal adjusted gross income of $70,000. We have approximately 40,000 taxpayers fall into this filing status, and this taxpayer would see a savings of $143 or 4%. So I hope you have found this of some interest, and I hope it alleviates some concern there that the middle income taxpayers would see an increase in tax.
Thank you, Deborah. We'd now like to turn it back over to Governor Patton, and he and Kevin will discuss the road fund.
Thank you, Jim. And Deborah, that was very informative. I've heard some people say that we should make up the shortfall in the road fund by selling bonds. Mary, do we have our slides? Okay. All right, just make sure I'm ready here. That could get us through the next few years, but it would be a quick fix, which would not be in the best interest of people who want good roads in Kentucky. Debt-financed construction of essential government infrastructure has a legitimate purpose in state government's overall program to serve our people. But there are limits. The first limit is how much of the government's annual revenue should be dedicated to debt service. This is a variable, but most students of state government financing in the United States would say that it should be somewhere below 10%. Debt service in Kentucky over the last 30 or so years has ranged between 8.03% in 1967 and 4.93% in 1979. Now, we don't have that chart up there yet. Another very important element of any, I need the other chart first. Another very important element of any debt financing program is exactly what revenue we're talking about, and this is very, very important. In general, we're talking about all of the revenue generated by the state government and its agencies. This doesn't include federal funds over which the state does not have the ability to generate. But the agencies that are counted include our cabinets and agencies like the Public Service Commission, and their revenues come from license fees and assessments and other vehicles that would be used to generate funds to carry on their operations. Agencies of state government also include our universities, including KCTCS. Agency funds include the revenue those universities generate from tuition, fees, room and board, parking, athletics, etc., all of the revenue generated by the university. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about a percent of state-generated revenue. We're talking about the state general fund. We're talking about all the agencies of state government, and we're talking about the road fund, and we're talking about the revenue of our universities. All of these revenues added together. This is the revenue to which we apply our debt service to measure the percent of our revenue dedicated to debt service. If one part of state government uses more than its fair share of the state's debt capacity, then other parts of state government can't get their fair share. This is the situation as we look at it in fiscal year 2000. I talked to you about the debt service for this current fiscal year is 5.89%. Now, if we'll go back 2 years ago, we actually calculated 6% debt service. The fact we actually sold the bonds a little bit cheaper than we had anticipated, so the actual debt service we are paying during this fiscal year is 5.89%, but it was supposed to be 6%. But the road fund debt service is 16.2%. That is, 16.2% of the road fund is going for debt service. The general fund debt service is 5.53% of the state general fund and what we generally call the state agencies. But the debt service being paid directly by our universities is only 1.27% of their revenue. The road fund is using the debt capacity of our universities. It seems to me that we all agree that we need to spend more money on roads, but evidently there's a disagreement about how to do it. It's just not responsible to use the state's total debt capacity to continue to maintain the current level of expenditure for road construction that we again all seem to agree is necessary. It is also not possible to do that. Now, this graph would show what would happen if we decided to use debt to maintain our proposed level of funding for debt service and the 6-year highway plan instead of facing up to the problem now. Now, the green line represents the revenue available for debt service and the 6-year highway plan with our proposed increase of 6 cents in the gas tax, the 6 cents being devoted to the 6-year highway plan. I've already talked about a 1 cent being devoted to a rural road program. That is a total of 7 cents. But 6 cents of that would go to finance the shortfalls in the 6-year road plan. And that is the total amount of money that would be available for the two purposes: debt service, which is the yellow line, and the remainder, the difference between the yellow line and the green line, is the amount of money that could actually be spent on improving our roads. That's our proposal. But now let's say that we want to keep that same level of expenditure, and we want to do it by issuing bonds. Then the debt service on the bonds is the red line. The debt service that it would take to have the total amount of money equal to expend the green line. The blue line is our current level of revenue. The blue line is our current level of revenue. So we could do that, and the amount of money available for construction would be the difference between the red line and the green line. And you can see that's pretty well constant out there till about the year 2010. And then it starts to hit the fan. The debt service goes up astronomically, and when it hits the blue line, we're out of business. We've done shut down the world. There is no more money. But yes, theoretically, I could continue the same level of expenditure cumulatively that we propose. But the amount of money being spent on roads would get continually smaller. The difference between the red line and the green line, until 2015, when we would shut down all construction and all of our blue line money would go to paying debt service. Or our proposal is to go ahead and face the fact that we don't have the revenue it takes to build our roads, and we do not propose to issue additional bonds, at least until we get the road fund down to 6%, which is its fair share. If we're going to have 6%, let's let the road funds get down to 6%, and then we might consider bonds. But let's not use the university's bonding capacities to build our roads anymore. But the amount of money that would be available under our plan to actually go to roads is the difference between the yellow line and the green line. And I think you can see that our program would do a lot better. I can paste over it. Now, I want you to understand that the next 4 years, there's not a lot of difference. Very little amount of difference. I can get through the next 4 years, but I don't want to be the next governor, and I sure wouldn't want to be in the General Assembly 4 years from now. That's what I'm trying to do. I could ignore this whole thing. I could ignore the whole thing. I can write a budget that we can get through the next 2 years on. And then we'll come back here 2 years, and everybody will be running for governor, and you'll have a lame duck governor, and then we'll turn this state over to the next governor, the same way it was when Louis Nunn took over in the late 60s. That's not what I want to do. I want to lay a foundation for a new Kentucky, a Kentucky that can give our people what we need. And let me tell you, roads are a very, very important part of that. And that's what this proposal is all about. I'd like for Kevin Flannery to give the details of our road program. Ms. Flannery.
Thank you, Governor. Make sure we're set up. You ready? I think anyone who's been around the governor very much understands how important Kentucky's highway system is and how dependent we are on that highway system. Sometimes we have to ask ourselves just why our highway is important. What's the value we get out of it? A safe and a modern road system is absolutely critical to economic development. A recent survey of business leaders showed that 95% rated a transportation system as important or very important when deciding where to locate. Having a safe and a modern road system is also vital to tourism, not the least of which is for the reason that most of our visitors come by automobile. The so-called new economy of the 21st century, with its reliance on just-in-time delivery, the new burgeoning package delivery industry, they demand efficient travel. Folks like UPS and DHL have invested in Kentucky because of our location and because of access to airports and highways. Finally, having a safe and a modern road system contributes to the quality of life of every Kentuckian. A road system takes us to work, takes our children to school, it makes us closer to health care and closer to our families and friends. The Transportation Cabinet has dedicated itself over the last few years in making sure that we satisfy our customers. First thing you've got to do, obviously, when you're trying to satisfy your customers is know what your customers want. And nationally and in the state, motorists have told us three things are important. They've cited safety, smooth pavement, and traffic flow as their highest priorities. In fact, these three factors absolutely dominate in terms of importance. What we're asking ourselves is, are we delivering? Are we providing safe roads? Are we providing smooth pavements? And are we easing traffic congestion? First thing we ask is, are Kentucky's roads safe? Compared to surrounding states and the national average, Kentucky has a significantly higher fatality rate. In fact, the problem is most severe on our rural two-lane roads. The fatality rate there is an astounding 3 times higher than the average of all the other state roads we have. Between 1992 and 1997, over 5,000 people died on the highways of Kentucky. You can't place a value on human tragedy, but the other costs attendant to that. Vehicle accidents cost Kentuckians about $3.3 billion annually. That's in emergency costs, medical care, lost productivity, property damage, things of that nature. Again, we've got to ask, are we providing safe roads for the citizens of Kentucky? Kentucky's many narrow roads and bridges greatly contribute to that high fatality and accident rate. According to the Federal Highway Administration, our narrow lane problem is 4 times the national average. And one-fifth of our bridges need upgrading or replacement. Clearly, safety is something that we need to pay attention to. Second to safety in our customers' minds is obviously smooth pavements. Again, we ask ourselves, are we delivering the smooth pavements that our customers are telling us they need to do business and to live in Kentucky? Despite increased spending for resurfacing, wear and tear from heavier loads and the dramatic increase in traffic volume have led to a backlog of 3,000 miles. Now, we need to keep in mind that just to keep pace, we have to resurface 2,000 miles a year. To meet the backlog and address the backlog in the 6-year plan, we would need to increase pavement spending from $125 million per year to about $217 million per year. Finally, the third demand. We have to ask ourselves, are we easing traffic congestion in this state? The Federal Highway Administration rates congestion in hundreds of miles of our interstates, both urban and rural, are considered congested. In our 3 large metropolitan areas alone, congestion costs $1 billion per year. Congestion means time lost means money. All of this is on top of the fact that statewide travel has increased 50% in the last 10 years. Now, these issues and these realities exist despite the fact that Kentucky's Transportation Cabinet has been rated in the top 10 as far as efficient money managers in comparison to other state highway cabinets, in spite of the fact that we've been recognized repeatedly for quality improvement efforts and measuring and gauging our performance. So in light of those things, we have to ask, are we investing enough in the highway system? Compared to other states, Kentucky's investment per mile of state-owned road is only 60% of the national average. We've also fallen further behind as traffic volumes have increased. From 1990 to 98, I think you'll see that Kentucky went from $30 to $32 per 1,000 miles driven. Nationally, the average went from $31 to $36. In that time span, we managed to stay 10 years behind the curve, something we can't afford to do. This low investment and spending rate is made worse by the fact that Kentucky's roads are unique, and they're more expensive to build, and they're much more expensive to maintain. You know, the things that we value in Kentucky, the mountains, the streams, the seasons, those cost more money. The fact is the Commonwealth's mountains and many streams require more excavation and the use of expensive bridges. Then once the road is built, they endure more weather-related disasters and damage such as the floods and the freeze-thaw cycles. Kentucky has on average between 25 to 35 freeze-thaw cycles a year, which is much higher than both the folks to the north of us and to the south of us. With those things in mind, it would seem that Kentucky needs to be investing more, not less, than our neighbors. The question is obviously, why is our spending lagging? Why is our investment lagging? And the answer, quite simply, is inadequate growth in the road fund. Traffic volume has increased dramatically. There's no doubt about that. But the road fund's buying power has been almost flat, growing less than 6%. Why is that so? The most major component of that is the road fund is the motor fuels tax has actually lost ground against inflation over the past 10 years. The fuel tax collected in fiscal year 99 actually buys 12% less than it did in fiscal year 1989, and that's where we're losing ground. So what does that funding situation and the fact we've lost ground with the fuels tax mean for our future? The highway system is aging, and it'll continue to age. It'll carry more and more traffic. Basic maintenance will consume larger and larger portions of the slow-growing road fund. And at the same time, the pressure has never been greater on the 6-year plan for new construction, for new jobs. To deliver what the customers want, what the citizens need, we need to build more projects that address narrow lanes, that address safety, that address reduced congestion, that fix bridges, and that improve mobility and access throughout the state. We've been hard at work in identifying those projects, and currently the Cabinet has identified a list of $40 billion in construction projects that are needed today. However, the 2-year biennium allows us to invest only $2 billion to the plan. The Transportation Cabinet projects that a 50-year period would be needed to deliver this list of worthy projects and deliver it now. And that's not all. We also know there are others. Through a new input process that the legislature put in place, we've received $8.7 billion worth of projects from legislators that they want in the next plan. Clearly, we need to address those concerns. A more immediate challenge is that the current 6-year highway plan is $500 million out of balance for the years 2001 through 2004. All of these funding problems threaten Kentucky's transportation future. When we look at that, we have to ask ourselves the very simple question, where do we want to be in Kentucky 20 years from now in terms of our highway system? First thing is clear is that we must preserve our existing system. We have a $200 billion system out there. We need to make sure we keep it at the highest value. We must also give our motorists those safe, smooth, and free-flowing roads that they demand and that they deserve. We must widen roads that now limit economic development and endanger our citizens. Kentucky's vision for the future must clearly recognize the painful lesson that the quality of our roads will dictate economic success or failure, societal advancement or stagnation for entire regions of the Commonwealth. The time is right for Kentucky to provide a better foundation for the future through a restructuring of our state motor fuels tax. As you can see, at just over 16 cents per gallon, Kentucky's gas tax is the 46th lowest in the nation. Can we afford to be 46th in safety, 46th in pavement conditions, 46th in traffic flow? The answer is no, so we must ask what investment is necessary. According to a AAA study, to operate a new automobile in this state, it takes about approximately 45 cents per mile. Now, the lion's share of that goes for the car itself at about 27 cents. Insurance is about 5 cents per mile. Maintenance and fuel are both about 4.5 cents per mile, which leaves a little less than 4 cents per mile for taxes, taxes which pay for the roads, roads without which the car is useless. Changing the gas tax by 7 cents per gallon increases the tax per mile by only 1/3 of 1 cent. That's about $35 per year for someone who drives 10,000 miles. You also have to look at that in conjunction with what was mentioned earlier, the motor vehicle usage tax credit. By extending the trade-in credit to purchases of new vehicles and vehicles purchased out of state, and by allowing exempt trucks used in interstate commerce a tax credit, there's another $36.5 million that's picked up. So that 7 cents That 1/3 of 1 penny does not include the money saved by the consumer in the motor vehicle usage tax. What can you expect in return for that modest investment? Obviously, the motorists can expect a lot of things, and going to ask a lot of things about the safety, the smooth pavements, and the traffic flow we talked about earlier. FHWA has found that for every $100 million we invest on highway safety improvements, we will save 145 lives over a 10-year period. Safer roads is just the start. Obviously, the consumer gains when smoother roads are there for their vehicle. It's actually more economical to use a smooth road. Data from the Road Information Program shows that Kentucky's poor roads cost its motorists $342 million annually. These costs, when you take into effect some calculations by the United States Department of Transportation, amount to $133 for every driver. That's in wasted gas and excess wear and tear on the vehicle. Finally, the additional 7 cents at the pump will mean less congestion and more economic development. The additional revenues will assure that Kentucky can match its federal funds. Congress has allotted us more money for interstates and other major routes, and that's where we find a lot of the congestion. After we maximize that, Kentucky can turn and must turn its attention to the mailbox routes. Now, the mailbox routes for most of us means the road in front of our house. They're the same roads that we talked about earlier that are too narrow, that have too many fatalities, and that can't serve the modern economy. The additional 1/3 of 1 penny per mile paid by each user of the system will give Kentucky a chance to make real progress in fixing these problems. It'll help us put the 6-year plan back on schedule and start to take a real bite out of that $40 billion backlog of needs we talked about. Clearly, we all want a quality system. We want one that will provide a better future for all of Kentucky citizens. The question is not whether we're ready to make that commitment. The question is whether we can afford not to. As we enter this new century, the commitment we make now is an investment in each of our future.
Thank you, Mr. Flannery. Well, there you've seen an all not too brief summary of what we propose, and now we'll take some questions. But I think the important thing is that this does reduce the, this does basically a revenue neutral program that will move Kentucky forward. Questions?
Governor, I'm going to get in trouble. I usually get in trouble when I open my mouth, but I'm going to tell everybody who I am, so if I get in trouble, I'm going to get in trouble. I'm Buddy Smith from Paducah.
It's Buddy Smith from Paducah. I'll translate here. Let's make it brief.
Okay, I just want to say one thing. I'm up here all the time asking for this and that for my county. But as you said, and this was of interest to me, you don't have to do this. You could float right on. And I certainly admire your courage to point out the problems that we've got down the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Another question? And I think we've got a graph over on the right, which is a portrayal of the bar chart that we showed about the income of who would pay more, and it shows more clearly that in the lower income brackets, the red line is the new proposed rate of taxation, percentage of taxation, and the blue line would be, the red line is the proposed and the blue line is the current. And that crossover is somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000, is that correct? That scale there is not linear, it's sort of logarithmic, and that causes it to look like there's a reverse curve in it. If it were really plotted linearly along the horizontal axis, it wouldn't show that aberration. I'm sure all that Malcross understands that real well. Got another? Yeah.
Take a bite on raising taxes. Why not take a larger bite?
Why not take a larger bite? I think you make a point. This is not an exorbitant tax increase. I believe that the total amount of the money we're spending, Jim, was stolen with federal money over the biennium was what, $35 million? $35 billion. $35 billion. And we're talking about $320 million a year. So that's $600 million. Is that 2% or 0.2%? With you math people?
The point is, if you've got legislators that you're going to ask to vote for a tax increase or two, depending on how you put it together, why not take a bigger chunk if you're going to?
We believe that The road tax is reasonable. It brings us very, very close to the national average. It's certainly in line with what we think that the tax ought to be. And with the general fund tax, it's really just to recover the taxes that we're losing. And as we demonstrated last night, with this amount of revenue, we can have a program. We can do what I think we need to do. I'm not saying this is the last adjustment of our tax rate that we'll ever have, but I believe that it will make our revenue grow. There was one other flat source of revenue that Mr. Ramsey didn't mention, and that's the lottery. The lottery is another major source of revenue that is also flat. So that 1/3 of our revenue that comes from other than the sales tax and the income tax is flat. And the revision of the way we tax the telecommunication industry will become a very elastic tax, a 9% growth rate. The adjustments to the property tax will allow the rate to go down, but the revenue that the state will generate will grow in the same proportion as the revenue that the local governments can generate from property tax can grow. And of course, we have among the lowest property taxes in the state, in the nation, and I like that because I hate property tax, but we have to pay it. What was the question?
Governor, I wanted to ask, you've given 11 profiles here. 9 of the 11 get a savings. 2 of the 11 have to pay more. If we're netting out this as a revenue increase, who else pays more and where do we get the money?
It is our belief that business will pay about 1/3 of this tax, and businesses are getting an awfully lot out of it. I hope that the businesses of this Commonwealth would understand that this is what it takes to finance our education program. Now, when you really get down to it, this is a proposal to finance our reforms on post-secondary education. That's where the revenue is going, that's where the need is, and that's what this will allow it to do for business. Notice I talked last night about the improvement in our area technical schools, substantial commitments to area technical schools, creating more productive workers for business. And we believe that businesses pay about 1/3 of that. The profiles, I'll let, whenever we did that in a very, very logical way, we tried to pick the highest. We tried to pick the profiles that would fit the largest number of individuals.
That's correct, Governor. Out of the 11 profiles, 10 of them were the most typical Kentucky filers. The one profile, the 200,000 AGI, that was the only one that wasn't typical. So yes, there are going to be some higher income taxpayers that are going to pay more.
But we're removing $58 million from the personal income tax. Is that the number, $58 million? So when you look at income tax, we're actually cutting the income tax.
What's the Kentucky alternative tax?
At a point in time, and it gets complicated now, Bonnie, we're getting Bonnie Lee is the star of this thing. It's Bonnie did it. Now, I want everybody to know Bonnie did it. It's Bonnie stand up. I want Bonnie Lee stand up. She's our income tax, and she did it. She did it. Let me try to explain this, and she can straighten me out. At some point in time, the taxpayer will begin to calculate an alternative tax for a married couple filing jointly that is $60,000. Now, that doesn't mean they start paying more taxes at $60,000, but they go from a straight line from $60,000 to 150, 170. A straight line between $60,000 and 170. There's a procedure where they go from up to a flat 6% of their Kentucky adjusted gross income, and that line crosses depending on the individual. It could cross at $70 or $80 or $90 or $100,000. It's an alternative tax. For two people filing separately on the same return, that is $30,000 each, or a total of $60,000. For a head of a household, a single parent head of a household, that line starts at $50,000, and for a single person, it starts at $40,000. So it's a it's an all, that goes from there, and does all that go to 170, or does it go?
It all phases out over 110,000.
From wherever it starts to 110,000 more than that, then you hit 6%. You have a 6% flat tax of your federal adjusted gross income reduced by your charitable deductions and certain other deductions that you have to take. We can't tax certain things and certain economic incentives. You want any other simple questions there? Mark?
Mark? Tax Fairness Initiative, you say that approximately 200,000 Kentuckians who currently file returns would no longer owe income. But 200,000 Kentuckians who currently file wouldn't necessarily be paying taxes anyway, would they? So how many filers would actually pay no taxes under this that don't pay any now?
The question is, we said that 200,000 people would not file, and he's questioning, does that mean that 200,000 people are all of those 200,000 people paying taxes now? That's the question.
I think, I'm not sure I understand fully. The 200,000 that we are saying that those people will not pay under the proposed system, but they pay now.
So we're saying those...
That's correct. That is correct.
And when we say that how many won't pay, stay the same, what we're saying, it'll be less than $10 change. What is that number?
There's 270,000 or so
270,000 people where we said their tax won't change. What we're meaning is it won't change more than $10 up or down.
Right. Governor, I'd like to make another point on the individual income tax that may not have been clear. We're proposing enactment for January 1, 2001, not the filing year that we're in today, that we just entered in this January. So implementation would begin, and we do have some forms that we've worked up, and they're not ready for release yet, but over the next day or two, we'll have some actual sample forms that will be under development during this intervening year, and makes the calculation of the Kentucky alternative tax far simpler than it sounds, just to do some sort of a narrative presentation.
And again, the purpose here is to allow our income stream to grow as much as anything else, and cause us not to have to face these problems as badly in the future. And the nexus issue is also a potential growth, potential for growth income. Mark?
If that's the case, it would be, all of this is for the 2001 tax year? Is that correct? Or the 2000 tax year?
It's calendar year 2001. And if you look on the chart over here, which I think you may have a copy of, Mark, some of these implementations cross over fiscal years, so you see half the effect in one column.
That's what I wanted to get to.
Yeah.
So the calculation of $25 million lost general fund revenue then is essentially half the fiscal year.
That's correct. But as Governor Patton pointed out, in response, I think, to Tom's question, there is a net reduction in the individual income tax of over $50 million a year. And that's part of the reason that explains more of the profiles show a savings than they do an increase.
Mark Heber? Take that. You want to take that mic over there? Let him be heard by everyone.
I've done this once or twice. If you go to the profiles where you get two parents, two dependents, and you're talking about $100,000 of income for that family, you're saying that those folks will see a decrease in their taxes of $447, taken as a whole, all the taxes increase and decrease. Does that maybe...
Talk to Ms. Deborah about that.
It seems to stretch credibility a little bit. You're talking about a family that's got a six-figure income is going to actually benefit from this tax package, and I want to point out, probably Tom was going to do this too, the sales tax on repair and installation labor, you've only got them down for paying $34 a year. That's like one car repair.
Well, actually, but on the car repair, that would be spending $433 in the labor. And please remember, when you take your car to have it repaired, if you're having brakes put on it, the brakes are already taxable. So it's just the labor portion that's going to be a new piece. So we're saying this profile number 6 of the two parents with two kids that make $100,000 will spend approximately $433 on labor, on the labor portion.
My question is, does that throw in everything? Does that throw in every little bit of the tax plan? It doesn't appear to. it appears to me it might be misleading folks with this two parents with two dependents. Is that all the governor's plan, all the new taxes they're going to pay, all the tax cuts they're going to get over the next 2 years, they would benefit $447?
That's correct. That for this profile, and I can tell you that, I mean, it does depend on your itemized deductions. It does depend on the amount of child care you used. For this family, we said that they had $15,000 in state itemized deductions. We thought that was a reasonable number, and we said they had a $192 child care credit because they had 2 children. So for this family, yes, we're saying that on the income tax they would save $200.
But correct me if I'm wrong, that does not take into account any sales tax they would be paying in addition for cable television services and any additional taxes they would be paying on interstate telephone calls. Is that correct?
That is correct, but can I please qualify that? That's because that is a very difficult estimate to come up with. The reason being is some people, even this profile family, could see a decrease in that tax because remember, we're extending the base, but we're lowering the rate. So currently now, I live in Frankfurt, my phone bill has a 6% rate and a 3% rate. That will fall to a 6% rate. So I can use an average amount of interstate long distance and still see a decrease in taxes on that bill. So that will vary widely by family.
What does this example assume on the motor vehicle usage tax credit? Are they buying a car, is that averaged out over years, or is that just buying a car this year?
The motor vehicle, I'm sorry.
5 years.
5
You're assuming
years.
that's a 5-year average, that you buy a new car every 5 years.
The assumption here is that they have 2 cars, of course, and that we took 40% of the total value and said that older used car would be traded in and they would buy a new car every 5 years. And that's, as the governor said, divided by 5 years.
Governor, could you put the trade-in credit in this package in order to assuage the car dealers on the repair proposal?
I think it's a matter of fairness. You buy a used car and you try to trade a used car in on it, and you can take credit for the used car value. You pay the difference. The money changes hands. You buy a bulldozer and you pay sales tax on the money that changes hands. It's the only place that I know of that kind of a transaction that we're collecting tax on the entire value, and people resent it. People resent the fact that they go downtown, they buy a $30,000 car, they trade in a $20,000 car, they write a $10,000 check, and then somebody says, yeah, but you've got to write sales tax on $30,000. You got to write an $1,800 check, if my math is correct, instead of that $600 check on your $10,000 purchase. Again, there's a great part of this is to have fairness, and if people perceive the tax system to be unfair, they get frustrated with their government if they feel their government is treating them unfairly. So fairness and growth, as well as meeting the immediate needs of our educational institutions, are the 3 reasons that we're proposing this program.
Governor.
Al, let me elaborate on Governor Patton's point on the car.
You've been watching a presentation by Governor Paul Patton and members of his administration of the governor's Tax Fairness and Equity Plan for KET. I'm Bill Goodman. Good evening.
If a county only has 20% of its roads that are unpaved, maybe there's some roads that don't need to be paved. Maybe they're really in a remote area and they don't need to be paved. Or if they do need to be paved, they can handle that on their own. When you're looking at Colwell County with 86% of their roads, how can they ever do it? Looking at Pulaski County with 70-some%, 1,000 miles, how could they ever do it? Never could, never could. But for those counties that still only have 20%, they can make it one way or the other. So we said, let's take the first 20% and assume that the counties can handle that percentage, 20%, and then let's take the remainder. And of that remainder, of the miles of roads that are more than 20% of the county's road miles that are unpaved in those counties that have more than 20%, that's the 15,000 miles of roads, of unpaved roads. And we do that in what we call excess unpaved roads, roads in excess of 20%, and that number is 9,063 miles. And if we took a penny of our gas tax, about $28 million, and then if we figured at about $50,000 a mile, we could pave all of those 9,000 miles in about 16 years. And that's what we're talking about doing. Then after that 16 years, we would start bringing that 20% level down. Then we would go down to all the counties that had more than 15% of their rural roads unpaved. And then when we got all down paved, we'd go down to 10%. And when we got all those paved, we'd go down to 5%. And we would come darn close to paving every rural road in Kentucky that needed to be paved. Well, I will say as a flat statement, we will be able to pave every rural road in Kentucky that needs to be paved in 20 years. And that's what I'm recommending that we do. Let's go through some slides. What do you got first there, Linda? Let's talk. Let's go with the descending order of the amount of money let's go with the percentage of roads unpaved. Descending order. Have you got that descending order of roads unpaved? The Caldwell County, 86%. Have you got that?
Not in an
Okay. Do you have what the counties will get in descending order, or you just have it just alphabetical? Just alphabetical. Okay. Well, let's go to the whole slide alphabetically. Right here it is.
I have a copy here, but it's just not an overhead.
You want to do this on an overhead? You all have got all this out in front of you. As you see, this is alphabetic. This is descending order. This is descending order. And let me say, I hope you've heard, we had a mistake in a couple of 3 counties. We had taken Clay County completely out of the thing, and Wolfe County was virtually out. And we'd made some mistakes in that we had reversed what they had as unpaved roads, we were counting as paved roads, and so we made some mistakes. As a result of that, Wolfe County and Clay County have been put in a pretty big way, and as a result of that, the redistribution, each county has been reduced 3 or 4% from what you may have been sent yesterday. So what we're talking about today will be probably a little less than what we sent to you yesterday. And keep in mind, these are based on our current knowledge. Now, before that we actually get into this, we will verify that you have in fact these county roads, and they have to be adopted legally into the system by an ordinance, as you all know, and we're going to want to make sure that you actually have these roads, and so we will have a little program to verify that every county is shooting straight with us. But these are the numbers that we'll have in descending order. Pulaski County with 1,412 miles of total roads, 336 blacktopped, 1,076 gravelled, 76% of the roads gravelled will get $2,451,572. Again, that's based on $28 million from 1 cent of the gas tax and based on the current data that we have. Grayson County with, and I'm going to deal in miles of excess paved roads, excess gravelled roads. They have 390 miles, and they would get $1,204,779. Perry County with 326.9 miles of excess unpaved road would get $1,009,729. Going all the way down to McCreary County, 848,000, Allen County 796, Breckenridge County 735, Ohio 711, Morgan 682, Adair 665, and on down. 40, I think you have that in front of you, 76 counties sharing this funds. I guess we're down to questions. You got anything else, Linda? What do you want to put out there? The rules of the program, the parameters that we road aid money to get the roads in condition to pave, and the Commissioner of Rural Roads will certify that your roads are, that this particular road that you want blacktop, let's say you've got enough to blacktop 5 miles in your county, you'll say, I want these 5 miles blacktopped. They'll verify that the road is properly drained and a proper base. and that will be your responsibility. And when that happens, they will let a contract, either through your purchase contract, through the state's purchase contract, or through a separate bid contract for the paving of those roads. So this money will stay with the state road fund, just like the coal severance tax stays with the state treasury. The commissioner, of course, will have to certify when you met the criteria for eligibility, and it's 20% of all the miles of the county's road system will be subtracted, like we've talked about, and then that's 20% of all the roads will be subtracted, and if there's anything left, that is your excess miles of excess unpaved roads. And then all the miles of the state will be totaled, and then each county's share of the 21st Century Fund will be proportional to its share of the total excess unpaved roads in the state. There will be a fund for each county set aside, and as the money comes in, it'll be put into this fund, and then will be allocated to each county's fund. The funds will be expended by the commissioner upon an application by the fiscal court, after a public hearing on the use of the funds and a determination by the commissioner the application meets one of the most critical needs within the county. So, you know, we're not just going to let somebody pave the road out to the farm. There's got to be a public hearing, and then even if the commissioner says, well, you had a public hearing, everybody protested, but you did it anyway, the commissioner has the authority to say, I'm sorry, but this is not the most pressing need in your county. One of the most pressing needs. Again, as I said, they're dedicated solely to the paving of unpaved roads. And an unpaved road, to us, is chip and seal. That is, we do not consider chip and seal as a permanent paved surface. So if you've got a lot of chip and seal road, I personally think, I know you all do a lot of chip and seal to sort of try to get by, but I think in the long run, if we can invest that money in permanent pavement, you'll be better off. But I know when you're 500 miles behind and trying to keep the dust down and trying to keep the mud down, you got to worry about next year. You know, heck, you can't worry about 10 years from now. As I said, there'll be state funds to be spent on behalf of your county. Criteria: your county roads must be adopted into the system according to KRS 177.01. It must be identified by name, number, length, and termini within the ordinances identifying the road, and the roads must be identified on a USGS map or similar map. Let me talk to you about that. You can get one of these tope maps without the lines on it, without the tope lines on it. You can get it without the green stuff on it. You can get just a regular map that you can identify your roads on. Pike County, we did this 15 years ago in Pike County, and it makes a great county road map. And give every one of your roads a number and put them on that map and keep it up to date. So we want to see a map of the road. And if anybody has any problems with that, I'll come up and do it for you. But use the USGS maps without the tope lines. You know what they are, don't Steve? You know the ones I want. If anybody doesn't have that or doesn't understand that, well, let us know, and we'll help you, show you how to map your roads and how to describe them. The county certifies by November 1st of each year the miles of roads that they've got. And each year we're going to recalculate that share. And then once all counties have 80% of the roads paved, the base percent of unpaved roads, 20% will be reduced in 5% increments until all county roads are paved. And then 3% of the fund will be used for administration. Again, we're going to go out and check these. And they took this out on me, and I didn't give up. I just quit arguing, Bill. But I think all of your roads ought to be identified by a sign. Now, I know you can't keep them, so what I had in here, some of them you can't keep, but what I had in here was that either all your roads were identified by a sign, or at least if somebody had stolen the sign, you had to show that you had at least paid for a sign within the past year. And so now, I mean, those are things that I think needs to be done. Obviously, we're open to input and suggestions from you all, and we'll start drafting some legislation, and I'll take questions. Judge?
I have a few questions, if you don't mind. Is this based on the premise that possibly there will be an increase in the gas tax?
Well, I just said this will be 1 cent of the gas tax, and that's all we're talking about today. We'll talk about the rest of that tomorrow.
Well, okay, so my question is, what if the legislature determined that they were going to approve the gas tax, but it was only going to be 2 cents? Is 1 cent go to this program?
Well, they don't let governors pass laws up here. Sometimes I wonder why, but I can't anticipate what the legislature would eventually do. Today and tomorrow, we will be articulating our total program for moving Kentucky forward. And this is one very, very vital part of it. I think that most of you have been advised that there's also a $210 million investment package for Kentucky that includes at least $250,000 for every county. At least $250,000 for every county. Of that $210 million, about $48 million is devoted to water and sewer projects. It has been primarily put together with the input from your legislative delegation. Now you'll see that a lot of counties that don't do real well in this program do better in the capital investment program. The counties that do real well in this program don't do as well in the capital community development program. So these really, when you look at the the community development portion, which is that $210 million of one-time money, that's one time, is balanced off against this $28 million of every year money. And so, as best we could, taking in a whole lot of different factors, need as much as we can. We've tried to craft between these two programs. We've tried to craft what is as fair as we know how to do it. Fairness, to a great extent, depends on where you're sitting and what direction you're looking. But from our perspective, trying as best we could to look out over the benefit of all the state, looking at the need, we've tried to do it fair. Now, there's another $50 million that we're set aside to put water districts. This will be paid for out of the tobacco money, and to put water into rural counties that are heavy tobacco counties. That is not designated in here. If that is approved, we'll come up with a program to distribute that to the tobacco counties. There is also the coal severance tax program, as you know, that we've recommended that 20% of those funds be set aside for training, and the remainder of the single county fund be dedicated to community development projects, and we're emphasizing water there. There again, working with your legislative delegation. I've got so many numbers in my head, but there's about Jerry Johnson, $50 million in that, and so much is set aside for training, and 20% I think for training, and about $16 million of that money goes to water. So all together, this whole budget of ours, when you throw another $60 million worth of other money, will be about $180 million of water. Now, add to that our CDGB and our ARC money. There's no question that we'll be investing well over $200 million during the next biennium in water in Kentucky. Water and some sewer. It will be by far the greatest investment in rural water in the history of the state, and probably anywhere in the United States on a needs basis. So these are programs to do, as I've said, that I wanted to do all along. Get water to every Kentuckian in 20 years, and get a decent road to the house of every Kentuckian within 20 years, and we've got a program that will do that.
Yes, Governor, have you ever considered allowing counties to put the penny on gasoline tax itself directly?
I don't think that the rural counties would want it done that way, because it wouldn't. You'd be surprised how little gas you sell in a rural county. Now, if you're in Jefferson County, you'd probably be for that, Dean.
Yes, sir, Governor. I applaud you. Thank you for your initiative that you've presented today. But maybe we need to look at, in that initiative, making sure we don't add any more gravel roads to our systems, and maybe set up minimum standards. I don't think we want to add a lot of additional gravel county roads to our systems over the years. It's so easy to add a county road to your system right now, and you can add a 8-foot, 10-foot system legally. And in order to make this work, we would have to nip that in the bud, make sure we just don't roll that way.
Well, let me say that I always had the philosophy that the public road extended to the last property owner at the end of that road. So, I mean, I personally, if it's a road, then I need to get to my property. I think it's a public road. It is by law a public road. And if it's a public road, it ought to be a county road. So I really, I mean, if you haven't been doing that, to me, that's county road. The county's responsible for it. It's a public road. So my rule has been it goes to the property line of the last property owner. If it has to go across somebody else's property to get to your property, it's a public road and it can be a county road. So you may want to go out and, if you know, you may want to put them in. I don't know.
I was just concerned about the standards.
Well, let me tell you, the standards that you might get by in Nelson County just won't work in Pike County. The standard is, if you can get a car on it, it's a road up in Pike County. I'll tell you. I don't know where you'd like that standard or not.
Gary Nelson, Lawrence County. We presently have capabilities of doing paving in our own county road system right now. With these new funds, will we be able to do that with our own county road equipment, or does it have to be bid?
That will be up to the commissioner. The commissioner will make that decision, but in my opinion, should the commissioner believe that that's an efficient way to do it, that would be permissible. But it would be that, you know, it is anticipated that the state will pay the contractor. So if you buy the blacktop and put it down with your own forces, the state would pay the contractor. Whether or not he would pay you for putting it down, I'd let him negotiate on that. But yeah, I would say all we're interested in is making sure that the work is done. We don't want to send money down to the county and then have to worry, well, did they spend it here or did they spend it there? You spend the money and document it, or at least you incur the bill and then we'll pay the bill. But we want to work with you, Judge.
I want to thank you for this program, but I want to ask a favor to you. When you put the width on it, don't make it too wide.
Well, if you can get a car on it, it's a road in my book, Judge. I had, who was it? That wasn't Mac? Yeah, I had, who was the highway commissioner before Mac, or the state highway engineer before you? Newman? I had him up on the head of Grapevine, and he said, I didn't know that you could get a box down this narrow. I mean, to tell you, a 7-foot road is I've got 7-foot blacktop roads in Pike County. So no, they won't, if you can get a car on it, it's a road in my book. Is that right, Miss Johnson? Mr. O'Bannon? You changed your view, you just got that, just now started thinking that way, didn't you? Mr. O'Bannon? Judge O'Bannon?
Possibility of affecting the formula that the money's, county road aid money is given out of the
It has no impact on the county road aid money. County road aid money is the same as it has always been. Judge?
I would be negative if I didn't stand up and say, I'm Darrell Shearer, Class County Judge. They call me Paul Patton Republican.
Well, they call me a Darrell Bashir Republican is what they call me.
As the county with the #1 miles of road, total miles in the state of Kentucky, I would be very negative if I didn't stand up and say, I think it's a hell of a vision. And I commend you, Governor, for you've been there and you did that. And for the first time, I think, in my memory in the history of Kentucky, that you have a governor that can look back and say, this is what we need to do, and look at ways to find a solution. And as far as I'm concerned, let's vote it today and let's go.
Let's start spending it. Judge? Well, it would go into effect around July the 1st, and we would be certifying it. Whether we would actually have any available for this fall or not, I don't know. But it's possible that as money would come in, you can figure it'd be 1/12 of $28 million a month. But you're a month late. It'd be due in July. The first money would come in August. Whether or not we get any done this fall or not, I don't know. I would suspect probably not. I suspect the truth of the matter is, by the time they get all the paperwork done and get all the work, we would probably look for the construction season of next year, and that's probably when it would actually start. Because there's one thing you may want to do is look at your roads this winter that you want and make sure they're well based. As you well know, if you put this stuff down with an inadequate base, it's a waste of money. And so if you could sort of calculate what your county's going to get for the next summer, and if you could sort of concentrate on putting the base in there, and boy, you let that base go through a winter. What you need to do is to let that road go through a winter and let that gravel work its way in, and then when it dries out next summer and gets good and hard, and then you pave it and keep that water off of it, then you probably got a good base that would hold up under normal traffic. So I think we probably ought to talk about the summer of 2001.
Let them hire a bunch of them 100-ton trucks to drive on them all summer.
Let me tell you, you've been a coal truck hauling them up for 2 or 3 years, you'll have pretty daggone good base, I'll tell you that. Okay. Thank y'all, appreciate it.